Hi, it's Jake from Seneca again, back with my second video. Today's video will be on the Beechcraft Baron. We start our tour by the baggage door. You will notice that our Barons have a static port just aft of the baggage door and a matching one on the other side of the airplane. GER and DTS both have one on each side, but PIN has two on each side. The extra static ports are for some special test equipment. Many years ago, Seneca was asked to help the University of Toronto collect some data for a study they were doing. They paid to have an extra static port and an extra GPS antenna and an extra ADF antenna installed. At the end of the study, it was just cheaper to leave it all installed. The next thing we see is the intake for the cabin fresh air blower. You will notice the black drain tube under the airplane to drain away any water that comes in with the fresh air. DTS doesn't have this intake as it uses the intake for the air conditioning system instead. Question number 1. What turns on when you turn on the blower switch? Is it A, one fan at the back, B, one fan at the front, C, one fan at the front and one at the back, or D, the air conditioner? When you turn on the blower switch, it turns on a fresh air blower at the back and also turns on the blower fan for fresh air through the heater. If the heater is off, this air will remain cool. If the heater is on, this air will be warm. When you turn on the heater, a third fan comes on that supplies air for the combustion in the heater. As soon as you are airborne, the squat switch on the landing gear will turn off your fresh air blower fans since the ram air is enough to supply all your fresh air needs. It doesn't matter if the switch is left on or off, but if you leave it on, the fan will come back on when you land. As we move around the back, you will notice that the elevator is a horn-balanced elevator, where the horn in front of the pivot line is filled with lead to balance the weight of the main elevator in order to help control flutter. There are other measures to prevent flutter, but there'll be more on that later. Question number 2. What type of elevator trim tab does the Baron use? Is it A, fixed pilot controllable tab, B, anti-servo pilot controllable tab, C, a servo pilot controllable, or D, a servo non-pilot controllable? As the elevator moves up and down, you will notice that the trim does not have any motion relative to the elevator. This means that it is a fixed trim tab, and since we can control it with the control wheel and electric trim switches in the cockpit, it is also pilot controllable. When you are doing your walk around, be very careful of the static wicks. Individual static wicks can be well over $60 each. Since we buy them in bulk, we get the price down closer to $40 each. But if you break the base that they are screwed into, the price is back well over $75, even our cost. Many years ago, we went to an aviation show to display our aircraft. When we came back from supper, someone had stolen all of our static wicks. On the Baron with 15 static wicks, that's almost $600. We don't always hurry to replace broken static wicks on the 172s because they don't usually go IFR. We replaced the static wicks on the Baron right away because these airplanes were meant to fly in all kinds of weather, and they rely on the static wicks to dissipate all the static electricity that builds up on the wings in cloud. Once the aircraft is airborne, the fresh air for the overhead vents starts coming in through a NACA ram air scoop on the side of the tail. You can control the amount of air coming in through this scoop with a movable door. This door has a very poor design as it is controlled with a very long push-pull cable attached to a very small silver knob in the middle of the overhead panel. This system is very stiff at the best of times with all the friction caused by the long cable run. Regular bearings don't come with a large inspection panel on the tail, and getting to the Autopilot servos and ELT is a very painful procedure that involves removing the entire back wall of the airplane and crawling over a bunch of avionics boxes. We noticed that pressurized bearings, or P-bearings, have a very large inspection panel to get to these things, since the back wall in a P-bearing is a pressurized bulkhead and can't easily be removed. We liked this idea and applied for permission from Transport Canada to use the certified parts off a P-bearing to modify ours. They agreed and we installed them. This door not only allows better access to the Autopilot and ELT, but also to the de-icing boot components and all of the flight control cables. When you look forward inside this panel, you will see thick blue plastic hoses that are part of the de-ice system, and you will also see the ejector valve used to suck the boots back down onto the wing after inflation. Besides that, you can see the fresh air blower and all of the ducting and drains for that. You can also see 3 of the 4 Autopilot servos and clutches. Question number 3. Why do the Autopilots have clutches? A, so they can shift into a higher gear for faster flight. B, so they can have more power. C, so the pilot can overpower them if the Autopilot runs away. Or D, because it goes well with the dress and heels. Autopilots have a clutch on each axis so the pilot can overpower it if it is doing something the pilot doesn't like. Behind the servos and clutches is the ELT. This 406 ELT broadcasts on 121.5 MHz and on 406 MHz. Some also broadcast on 243 MHz, which of course is double 121.5 and is the military frequency. A 121.5 ELT can narrow down your location to somewhere between here and Rice Lake. A 406 ELT can locate you between the maintenance hangar and the dispatch office. There are 406 ELTs on the market with a built-in GPS that can locate you down to about a 10-foot window. So far, we haven't felt the need to upgrade to that level of accuracy. 406 ELTs work on pulses sent to a constellation of satellites. Our avionics technician told me that in rare circumstances, there may not be the 3 required satellites overhead needed to triangulate your position. The constellation of satellites moves relative to the Earth, and within 20 minutes, enough satellites will see you to triangulate, and help will be on the way. It will take probably 20 minutes to get the search and rescue helicopter prepped and ready for takeoff, so it's really not much of a problem and not much of a delay. If you look towards the back, you can see some very large springs that provide part of the downforce on the elevator to give you its heavy feel. The elevator also has a large lead weight up under the dash to make it feel heavier also. This heavy feeling elevator system helps with flutter, but more importantly, it helps to prevent the pilot from putting in sudden violent control inputs that might overstress the airframe. Just ahead of the access panel is another vent. This time it is allow the cabin air to escape. With all the blowers blowing in new fresh air, we need a way to let the old stale air out. As we move around to the wings, you will notice the flaps. With the flaps down, you can see under the wing in the rear inboard cove area a set of 4 microswitches. These switches tell the flap to stop at the up, approach, and down positions. One switch is for up, One switch is for down, and one switch is for approach when the flaps are coming down, and the last switch is for the approach position when the flaps are going up. If you fly through rain, or if the airplane was recently washed, these switches sometimes get a bit sticky. This either makes the flaps stop working, or sometimes makes them hunt up and down, up and down, up and down. If you see this on a walk around, a simple spray of LPS1 lubrication from one of your friendly maintenance people will usually solve this problem. Moving out the wing, the Baron features mast balance differential ailerons. The left or pilot side aileron has a pilot controllable balance trim tab. A balance tab moves the same direction as a servo tab relative to the control surface, but doesn't go as far as a servo tab. A balance tab makes a control that would normally get heavier with faster speeds remain feeling light at those faster speeds. As we come around the wing, you will notice that our Barons have the optional long-range wing tank extensions. This means that our wing is longer and has 2 fuel filler caps instead of 1. Since the outer fuel cap is physically higher, it must be checked first to make sure that the fuel level isn't above the inboard fuel caps. If you look under the wing, you will notice 2 recessed tubes coming out of the bottom of the wing. The outboard tube is a pressure relief drain for the fuel tank. The inboard one is a siphon brake. If one of your fuel caps should happen to come off in flight, the siphon brake will eject air into the filler neck and hopefully prevent fuel from coming out. The science behind this makes sense, but I personally wouldn't trust it, and would be looking for a suitable airport to land at and reinstall my fuel cap. This is an all-weather airplane, so you will notice a black drain tube towards the back of the wing. This is a heated fuel drain so that the tanks can continue to breathe even in icing conditions. The stall warning vane on the front of the wing is also heated. This should be checked for function and heat before flight. There is a stall strip mounted to the leading edge of the left wing. This allows the inboard part of the wing to stall first, which allows your ailerons to keep working longer. This stall strip is mounted onto the leading edge de-icer boots and consequently is only glued on. From time to time, this glue will begin to come loose. Please let maintenance know right away so that we can glue it back on before it falls off, since this is required for flight. There is a wing-mounted fuel gauge that only works with the original tanks. It is fairly accurate between 20 and 60 gallons only. On the outboard side of the left cowl is an ice light that shines down the length of the wing to illuminate any ice buildup. Next to the ice light is the external power plug for ground power. If you want to sit and practice running checklists or flows, maintenance will be more than happy to turn on ground power and let you practice for hours and hours and hours. The heated propeller gets its power through a system of carbon brushes and slip rings. The carbon brush is not like a paintbrush, but is a solid block of carbon. The carbon wears over time and occasionally needs to be replaced. A pilot would notice this because the prop heat won't draw the full 15 amps if the brushes aren't making good contact. The alternators on the Barons originally came with a resistor mounted on a strong piece of phenolic. As these got old and wore out, the replacement part is a much more flimsy and liable to break. This resistor controls the alternator annunciator light. If it happens to break, the light comes on even though the alternators are still working. You will know that the resistor wire has broken because the load meters will still show an output for that alternator. Under the cowl, you will see 3 drain tubes. These drains handle over-priming and draining any residual fuel after shutdown. Around the gear area, there are 3 hardpoint fuel drains similar to a 172, and there is also a soft point fuel drain. This is actuated by pushing up and twisting. If you are a little bit too gentle releasing them, it will sometimes start dripping. If you release it quickly, it will usually seal properly. There is also another hard point out on the wing for the extended fuel tank. Unlike a 172, the Baron has cowl flaps to allow for variable engine cooling. If we look inside the cowl flap area, you will notice a large aluminum tube. This tube is the crankcase breather line and is where oil that has been overfilled will come out. The exhaust pipes should have very little movement. If they do move, look up into the cowl flap area and see if either of the brace rods has broken. The brace rods are nothing more than a piece of pipe that has had the ends squished and then drilled to accept a bolt. Where the pipe narrows down is very weak and will often crack. We find these rods broken about once a year, so please be vigilant. When we do maintenance to the landing gear, we will often undo the outer gear door. This allows us to see the inside of the gear well with the gear retracted. This way we can make sure everything folds up correctly and nothing is rubbing or chafing. At the end of the inspection, we reconnect the gear door and do one last gear swing to make sure that the gear door goes up properly too. It is one of my fears as an AME that one day I will forget this door and it will flutter until it rips off in flight. Please help me to sleep better and make sure that this door is fully attached before you go flying. As an aircraft gets heavier, the brakes need to get stronger. Our 172s have a brake system with one hydraulically actuated puck per wheel. The Bonanzas, being heavier, have 2 hydraulically actuated pucks per side, and the Barons have 3 big pucks per main wheel. These pucks are slightly smaller than a hockey puck and have an O-ring around their circumference. On one side they get pushed by hydraulic fluid, and on the other side they push on the brake pad. The landing gear has a scissor mechanism in the front. This allows the oleo to cushion the airplane while still keeping the wheel straight with the airplane. As the oleo compresses the scissors, they push up on a rod that is connected to the squat switch. In the air, the switch is pressed. On the ground, it is not pressed. If both main gear squat switches are not being pressed, electricity can't get to the gear motor and you can't accidentally retract the gear on the ground. These squat switches are also used for other things like shutting off the cabin air fans once you are airborne and turning on the transponder. The gear warning lights have their own switches. Up in the gear well, you can find the gear up switches and gear down switch. As each gear comes down and pushes the gear down switch, it will turn on the green gear down light. If neither switch is pushed, then the red in-transit light will come on. Once all 3 up switches have been pressed, the in-transit light will go out. The throttles also have small switches that get pressed if the throttles are reduced below a certain power level. If the gear up switches are still pressed, a horn will sound telling you that the throttles are in a landing configuration, but the gear is still up. Also up in the gear well is the electric auxiliary fuel pump. This red pump is made by a company called Dukes. The pumps have a very specific life. Even if the pump is sitting on a shelf and not being used, the time-limited life is still ticking by. This is why sometimes one of our airplanes gets stuck sitting on the ground waiting for a pump. We don't want to order them too far ahead or we would be wasting their limited lifespan sitting in our stockroom. Sometimes a just-in-time pump doesn't get here when it's supposed to. Up on the side of the fuselage near the storm window is the outside air temperature probe. Just ahead of that, you will notice a reinforced area on the fuselage. This armor plate is there to protect the fuselage from ice coming off of the props. Even so, the noise that the ice makes when it hits the fuselage in flight is extremely loud. Some people describe it as having the airplane hit with bullets. Even though it is very loud, the airplane has been designed to take the abuse, so don't worry too much. Under the nose, you can see a large aluminum tube. This is an air intake for the heater. The air is sucked in here, mixed with fuel, burnt, and exhausted out the pilot side exhaust pipe. It is very important that none of this air gets into the cabin. The air that goes into the cabin as fresh air or heated air comes in through the NACA scoop on the side of the nose cone. This air also cools the avionics that are mounted up here in the nose. The heater is a big, long canister. At the very front of the heater is an iris. This iris opens and closes like an iris on an old-style camera. It is a very poor design and very hard to open and close from inside the cockpit. Our recommendation is to leave it fully open all the time. Inside the front of the heater is the fan that draws in fresh air into the cockpit while on the ground. In the air, this turns off and ram air does all the work. Next, we need to get down and look up into the nose area. You will see the back end of the heater. On the very back, you can see a red button. This button is critical for winter operations. This button is a circuit breaker for the heater. If someone doesn't run the fan for long enough after the heater is turned off, or closes too many of the heater knobs under the dash, the heater will overheat and pop the breaker. If the next student doesn't notice this, they will have a very cold flight. I recommend pushing it before each and every flight just to be sure. While we're down here looking up into the nose gear, you can see the steering linkage on the pilot's side. You will notice that there isn't one on the co-pilot's side. When the rudder pedals are pushed all the way one way or the other, you can see that the nose wheel moves very little, and that most of the linkage's movement is taken up by a spring inside a bellows-style rubber sleeve. When steering on the ground, you are really giving a suggestion of which way to go, not actually steering. Luckily, you have differential brakes, and now that you are flying a twin, you have differential thrust. By bringing the power up on one engine and not on the other, it's impressive how tight of a turn you can make. Up in the front of the nose gear area, you will see the centering cam. This consists of a small ball-bearing wheel that gets directed into a narrowing channel as the gear swings backwards when it retracts. This is to keep the wheel centered in the gear well. The gear won't retract if the gear were to be turned sideways. The spring in the steering mechanism allows the rudders to be used even if the nose gear can't turn while it's retracted. The spring also provides some resistance so that you don't over-control the airplane. The radome on the front is made of a special E-glass that is transparent to radar signals. Any repairs must be done by a repair shop that is specially licensed. If the repair is done wrong, you will have all sorts of mirroring and false images on the radar display. If we remove the radome, you can see the actual radar dish. It's actually a flat plate that can be rotated up, down, left, or right. There are other avionics in this area too. On the pilot's side of the older Barons is the remote gyro that feeds a signal to the HSI. On the pilot's side, there is the limited brains of our Autopilot system. On DTS, this shelf is mostly empty as many of these features are all taken care of by the G1000 system. If you look in the nose baggage compartment, you will see the brake reservoir. You can remove the cap and see the fluid level. Since clean hydraulic fluid is almost clear, it can be hard to see the exact level. As long as you have a drop on the bottom of the dipstick, you probably have enough to go flying. In the top front corner of the baggage door, you will also see a Hobbs meter for the heater. This tells us how much the heater has been used and when we should schedule the next maintenance. On the back wall of the nose baggage compartment are two gold boxes. These are your voltage regulators. On the classic bearings, these have to be set up to be balanced with each other. This procedure usually involves locking Sean in the nose baggage and then running the engines while he adjusts the voltage regulators until the cockpit load gauges are balanced with each other. The voltage regulators on DTS are both on the co-pilot side to make room for the air conditioning ducts. They also don't have to be balanced with each other since DTS uses two fully independent buses, each with its own battery and alternator. Next to the pilot side voltage regulator is a blue hose. This hose is the exit for the instrument air. If it should become blocked with a spider's nest or anything else, the pressure will build up in the system and the glass on the front of your gyro instruments will crack and possibly fly at you, so be sure to check that this line is clear. DTS does not have this hose since it does not have any air-powered gyros. Inside the baggage compartment and to your immediate left is a row of circuit breakers. One of these is for the cabin lights. Maintenance will often pull this breaker during an inspection, and occasionally we forget to put it back in. On DTS, they split these breakers into two and place one on the pilot side to be run by the pilot side bus power. All of our bearings are equipped with a heated windshield. This is only a small portion in the middle of the windshield, and it is electrically heated. So that brings to an end another of my videos, the second one in the series. I guess listening to me talk for the better part of 25 minutes is probably enough to bring this video to an end. If there's anybody out there with mad video editing skills or wants to completely reshoot it from the beginning, by all means I am open to suggestions how to make these videos better. I'm also interested in topics. If you got any topics you'd like me to cover, that would be awesome. As a special PS or a way to end this video, I couldn't help but feature our trusty Bonanzas. Two of them have been sold already. There are two. The remaining two are up for sale. If you know anybody who wants one and has a spare $100,000 in cash, they're available. As a student who flew these airplanes many years ago, I'm going to be very sad to see them all gone. But I thought I'd feature them in this video at the very end because I won't get a chance to make a Bonanza video before they're all gone. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in future videos.